Transitioning to the Eastern Conference, the Boston Celtics and the Brooklyn Nets. Game 4 was yesterday at TD Garden. And I know that most of the headlines will revolve around the incident involving Kyrie Irving and the water bottle thrown at him from a fan. And it was a very, first of all, it was just disgraceful to see that. And I'm glad that he was charged with assault and battery with a weapon and likely will receive a lifetime ban. And because that's just intolerable. Should not be tolerated, and I'm glad to see that they address that. But I don't want this game, and unfortunately, it probably will be marred by that incident and stained because of that incident. But that's a shame because this was one of the most entertaining and mesmerizing offensive performances that I've seen in the postseason. I mean, this Brooklyn Nets team, just their offense looked absolutely immaculate. It was absolutely sensational. KD dropped 42 points. Silky smooth jumpers, just effortless. Literally, he would get the ball without dribbling. He would just face up a defender from the elbow and just rise up over him and knock down the jumper. He didn't even have to put the ball on the floor. He drops 42. Kyrie was just mocking almost and toying with the Celtics players, putting that ball in a yo-yo string. His dribbling display was exquisite. He drops 39 points. He was in his bag yesterday. The best ball handler that I've ever seen in the NBA so far. James Harden chimes in with a meager 23 points and a career high 18 assists. The big three for the Boston Celtics dropped 104 points yesterday. 104 points. Joe Harris even chipped in with 14 points on 4 or 5 shooting from the three-point line. And his shots, as much as we rave about the shooting prowess and this prolific offense of the Nets and how great of jump shooters KD, Kyrie, James Harden are, Joe Harris's jump shots and his three-pointers literally were nothing but net. And that was no pun intended. He was literally nothing but nets the entire game. Not a single three-pointer that he made, I think, hit the rim. No rattle it in. They were perfect, pristine jump shots that he was knocking down. And so the only downside, if you're the Nets, and again, this was the third time this year that they've eclipsed the 140-point mark. But this is the only downside is that they needed, Steve Nash needed to play James Harden, KD, and Kyrie those extensive minutes to try and get them more run so they get more comfortable with one another. That was the only downside to the game yesterday for the Brooklyn Nets, was the need to keep those guys in there just to continue to try and develop a little bit more chemistry and continuity in this postseason. That's the only downside. And we know how prolific they are on offense, and this team is truly, truly a juggernaut. And I know that this superlative has been used loosely and lightly, sometimes inappropriately, to describe other teams to a certain degree. And it's been kind of out of context used to describe other teams as a juggernaut. This team is truly a juggernaut. This team is truly lethal from everywhere on the court at all times. I think sometimes we kind of overuse and it becomes a little hackneyed when we use a juggernaut to describe a pretty good and efficient offense. But this is a truly good and a truly prolific offense that we're seeing. But the main takeaway for me, obviously the Nets are fantastic, but the biggest takeaway for me watching that game yesterday was just how badly I felt for Jayson Tatum. Man, I feel badly for Jayson Tatum out there. It was so sad to watch Jayson Tatum fight, compete in these games, in this series, and have close to nothing to show for it. He is so overmatched in this game, and it's not his fault at all. It's none of his doing. It's such a shame because here you have a guy in Jayson Tatum who drops 40 points yesterday. I'm sure you didn't even know that when you looked at the box score. Jayson Tatum drops 40 points yesterday. He's efficient shooting the basketball, 10 of 22. He's being double teamed on most plays, most possessions. 17 of 17 from the free throw line, 3 of 7 from the three-point line, even added 2 blocks on the defensive side of the ball. And they still get blown out. 40 points and they get blown out. And then to make matters worse, right before tip, it's reported that Kemba Walker's not playing. Robert Williams, who is their defensive anchor in the middle, he's a no-go. You already are without Jaylen Brown. And it literally took a 50-point performance in Game 3 for the Boston Celtics to eke out a win versus the Brooklyn Nets. Jayson Tatum needed to drop 50 points and needed Kemba Walker just to play. Kemba Walker just scored 6 points in that game, but they needed just his mere presence and a 50-point burger from Jayson Tatum just to eke out a win at home. That's what Jayson Tatum's doing. And again, I'm a Lakers fan, and I'm complimenting a Boston Celtics saying, I feel badly, I have sympathy for Jayson Tatum. That's what it's come down to. And so this series was never supposed to be Jayson Tatum versus the big three of Brooklyn. This was supposed to be the Nets' big three of KD, Kyrie, and Harden taking on the Celtics' big three of Tatum, Brown, and Kemba Walker. Now, again, whether or not you believe the Celtics' big three had a chance against the Nets' big three, that's irrelevant here. The reality is this has turned into not only a David versus Goliath, this has turned into David without an arm and a bruised knee against Goliath. Because it takes 50 points just to barely secure a win. 40 points does absolutely nothing. 40 points does absolutely nothing if you're Jayson Tatum. Nothing. Didn't do anything. It wasn't even that close. The entire game was over by the second quarter. And all I could think about watching that game was just tremendous sympathy. Because this guy, he already was respected by the Brooklyn Nets. But he has earned so much respect from the Brooklyn Nets. I know they won't say anything right now. They're waiting till the end of this series, and they'll close out the Celtics in Game 5 at home. But when this series is over, they're going to dap up this man and say, hey, I'm actually sorry for you, bro, that you had to do this by yourself. You're a transcendent player, just an incredible player. Because Jayson Tatum, what he was doing in this series, and especially over the last 2 games, I mean, this was like his 4th time scoring 50 points in the last month. That's how good this guy has been. And so this guy, he's arrived. We've talked about it before. Jayson Tatum has arrived, and he's been ascending. And I think if anything else, what we've seen and what he's shown is that he is more than capable of being your number 1 scoring option on a championship team. That's paying high respects, because I think the level of respect that people in the NBA and the Nets have had for him and have for him now has been elevated, has been heightened, has been raised. He's a just a ridiculous player, and it's a shame that he hasn't had his horses to go into battle with, to ride beside him, because the Nets, I still think the Nets would have won regardless, but this has just been an uneven fist fight and matchup going into the ring. So